So if we could all take a deep breath in, and out, and crick, crack, crick, crack. Once upon a time, there was a king. And this king was a good king. He ruled effectively. He was wise. He made good decisions. He was just, yet he was also kind. And he managed somehow to listen to everyone. No matter if they were rich or poor, strong or weak, powerful or without anything, he listened. He listened. And his people loved him. But he was becoming, shall we say, seasoned. And knowing that seasoning goes only so far, he realized he needed to choose a successor. And so he wrote down on a piece of paper the name of the next king. But then he put that piece of paper in an envelope, sealed the envelope with the royal seal, and handed this envelope to his most trusted advisor, asking him only to open it 7 days after he was gone. And so the time passed. And that seasoning just became spicier and spicier until his body just couldn't handle that spice. And he was freed. And for 7 days, the people of his kingdom, they mourned him. They told stories about him. They cried and they remembered. And then on the 8th day, people began to wonder who was going to be the next king. Who did he name? And could that king ever come close to matching their previous king? Well, the advisor, he called everyone together, everyone who worked in the palace, into the throne room. And he took out that envelope. He broke the wax seal, opened it up, and pulled out that piece of paper. And as he looked down upon it, everyone said, "So, who is it? Who's it going to be?" And he looked over and said, "The Jester. The fool." And everyone in the throne room said, "What? The Jester, the fool? How could it be?" But more shocked of anyone in there was the Jester himself. He didn't know what to do. He jumped around from foot to foot, awkwardly, his little dangly hat with the bells bouncing up and down. But there was nothing for it. The king had decreed it, and so the advisor approached him, removed his bright colored cloak, took off his hat with the dingling, dangling bells, and placed around his shoulders the royal robes, placed on his head the royal crown. And the Jester became the king. Well, it was terribly awkward for everyone at first. People would come to him with serious problems, and he did what he knew best to do. He would tell them a joke, or sing them a song, maybe he would make fun of them. It didn't go over so well. But he had something going for him. He was clever, he was quick, but most importantly, as the Jester, he had spent all this time in the throne room next to the other king. He'd gotten to see how the other king ruled, how he listened, what he said, what he did, what he decided. And so the Jester, thinking about this over time, started trying to emulate the king. And in doing so, he got better and better and better at his new job. And as the weeks turned into months and the months turned into years, people in the kingdom started whispering, "You know, he's good. He makes good decisions. You know, he's kind of wise. In fact, have you noticed how he's just, but also kind? How he can listen to everyone, weak, strong, poor, rich, alike." But there was one thing about the king that was a little bit strange. Every now and then, when he didn't have any pressing affairs, he would get up, and he would go to the back of his palace, and he would go to this room that he alone possessed the key for. And he would go inside and lock the room behind him, and he would be in there for some hours, and no one knew what he did in there. Some people thought that he went and meditated, some thought he prayed, some thought he divined the future with a crystal ball, some thought he kicked back and had a beer. But no one was really sure, and no one wanted to ask him. Until one day, an ambassador arrived at this palace. This man's job was to represent his kingdom in this capital. And he came into the palace curious about this king. He'd heard the stories, but he was a jaded politician. He didn't buy the stories. But as he watched this king, he was kind of impressed. The guy was pretty effective and wise. He was kind of just and kind. But how he listened to everyone with every fiber of his being, this struck the ambassador. But then the ambassador noticed how the king would just disappear. And when he asked other people in the court what happened and they didn't know, and he asked if they went to find out, and they said no, and he thought, I'm going to find out. He was a bit more brash than the others. So one day, he was sitting in the throne room and he watched as the king got up and slipped off. And he casually excused himself from the throne room and he stepped into the hall. Dun, 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 dun. Followed behind the king, hiding behind corners, looking where the king was going. He saw as the king walked over to the door, opened it, closed it behind him, and he walked tiptoeing over. He peeked through the keyhole, and there he saw the king take off his crown, take off his robes, and put over his shoulder the cloak of the jester, the hat of the jester, and begin to dance and to tell jokes to himself, doing cartwheels, singing songs, until, out of breath, he would walk over to the mirror he had in there, and he would look at his reflection and say, always remember that this is who you really are. You're not the king. No, you're a fool pretending to be the king. Remember. And when the ambassador saw this, it just pierced his heart. He understood. He understood how that king was able to listen so well to everyone. And he was so touched that he vowed to himself then and there to keep this a secret, not to tell anyone what he had seen. And he kept that vow. Years passed. The two of them came to be close friends, and they came to be very well seasoned. And one day, they were sitting together chatting, and the ambassador said, "Friend, I gotta be honest, listen. Years ago, when we were young, I followed you. I watched what you did in that back room. I understand, but I swore not to tell anyone, and I haven't. But there's this one thing about you, about how you became king, that's always bothered me." And the king said, "Well, tell me, what is it? How was it that the last king, the king before you, knew that you, a fool, a jester, would make such a good king?" And the fool, who pretended to be a king, smiled and said, "My friend, what do you think the last king was before he was king? Huh? Crick. Crick. Thank you.